work on adding the particle effects once the bullets they hit the wall, we need to verify for the collision. Okay, there are lots of ways to do this, but we're going to look into a very simple manner. Okay, so we have the wall game object here, but we can add a tag to it as well. So we can click here, okay, on this tag button. We select add tag. Okay, and in this new window, we press this plus button, and we need to define a tag for this. So let's say the tag of this is going to be trigger explosion. Okay, so whatever surface that contains this trigger explosion tag is going to be considered for spawning the explosion effect. Okay, and now back to the wall, we're going to go to the tag menu, click here, and select trigger explosion. Okay, and now we need to work on the actual collision. So to verify if the bullet is colliding with something, we need to go to the bullet script, and we're going to use a very special method here. We're going to type void on collision enter. We're going to open parenthesis, and we're going to type collision close parenthesis, open and close curly braces. Okay, so what is happening here? If you look at the bullet prefab, it contains the bullet script, it's okay, the rigid body to activate physics, but it also contains a sphere collider. Okay, so let's put a bullet in the scene to understand this better. Okay, if you look at the bullet and you disable the mesh render, you're going to see that there is an invisible, actually an outline of a sphere around it. Okay, around the bullet. So this is what is used for calculating the actual collisions that you see. Okay, so when you see the bullet hitting the wall or hitting the floor and rolling around, it's because it's using this sphere collider for processing collision and doing any physical changes in this scene. Okay, you can even increase or decrease this collider if you want. You can make it bigger or smaller than the mesh renderer, but it would be weird. Okay, we just use the same radius that is being used for by default. Okay, it's just the way it's going to work here. And whenever this collider hits another one, okay, so when it hits the wall like this, okay, you're going to notice that this wall also contains a box collider. Okay, this time it's a box one, it's not a sphere. Okay, but anyway, when both colliders overlap, they're going to generate a collision event. Okay, so that's when the actual collision happens. And if you define a method in any of these two objects that contain a rigid body inside it, and if you name it on collision enter and pass exactly this parameter here of type collision, you could use whatever name you would like here, but we use collision just so because it makes more sense, then we're able to understand where we hit. Okay, so when we type this method here, we can then type debug.log we have collided with something. Okay, so we're going to use this to print a message in this console. We're going just to test how this is going to look like. Okay, so let's save this. Let's delete this bullet instance that we added here. It was here just for the sake of explaining, so we delete it. Let's take a look on the console, and let's also disable this collapse field in here. Okay, now we're going to press play, and we have one explosion here. Let me just by the way, let's transform this explosion into a prefab first. Let's use 5 particles. We're going to drag and drop it here to save the prefab, and okay, let's delete it. Okay, now we press the play button, and we have an empty scene. Okay, just the wall and the floor. If we click to shoot one sphere, notice that it printed 2 messages: with collided with something, with collided with something. So it hit the wall and then it hit the floor. Okay, so we know that we hit 2 things. But what if we want to know what we have hit? Okay, so we can come here, and instead of printing this message, we can print collision.transform.name. So we're going to print the name of the object that we've collided with. Okay, so this time we wait one more time. Okay, now we're going to press the play button. Here we are again, and if we shoot, we've printed wall and floor. Okay, so we're getting close. We now printed the wall and we printed the floor. Okay, we start to understand what we are hitting here. But we need to read the tag of what we are hitting, okay, because we might have other elements here if later you want to develop the scene even more. Okay, if you want to add more elements, if you want to add a house, a door, maybe you want to add an explosive round, for example, then we need to check if we hit something with the tag trigger explosion. So instead of printing the name, now let's print the tag. Okay, if we save this and try again, you're going to see that one is going to show a tag, trigger explosion, and the other says untagged. And whenever other things that we hit that do not have a tag, it's just going to keep printing untagged. But now we have to compare what is the tag that we are hitting and if it's the same thing as trigger explosion. Okay, so instead of this debug here, let's take this off. We're going to type if collision.transform.tag equals to, and notice that we use two equal signs here, and this is a comparison, to the string trigger explosion. Okay, we need to check this. And if we hit something that is trigger explosion, then that means it's the time to do the actual instantiation of the explosion prefab. Okay, so here in the bullet we need to have a reference to that explosion prefab. So we're going to type public game object explosion prefab. Alright, we're going to save this and go back to Unity, and this time we're going to wait for this compilation to complete. And now, to change the bullet prefab, okay, notice that the instance is not here. There are two ways to change this. We could select the bullet prefab here and change the explosion prefab, okay, by just dragging and dropping it here. But there is another way that is interesting to see how it works. If we grab this bullet and put here, okay, actually let me just stop the scene. If I drag this bullet and put in the hierarchy, okay, we just have our bullet here, we have all of the fields that we have set as public, so shooting force, direction, and explosion prefab. But if we come here and drag this explosion and put it here, you notice that explosion prefab is now bold. Okay, it works like this because we just edited the prefab instance, okay, but this is not the actual prefab, so this is different from the actual prefab, from the original object that we are using. Okay, you can even click on the bullet prefab and see that explosion prefab is set to none. The one in the scene has it set, okay, it's set properly, but the prefab has nothing. So to save this change, you have to click on this apply button. Okay, so you notice that the bold effect has disappeared, and if you look at the bullet prefab, it's now properly saved here. Okay, so you can go ahead and delete this instance from here. Now back to the script here where we triggered the explosion, we have to instantiate the explosion effect. So we're going to type game object explosion object equals to instantiate, and between parentheses explosion prefab. And now we're going to type explosion prefab dot transform dot position equals to transform dot position. So it's going to be in the same place where the bullet is right now. And this time, if we save this code and go back to Unity and wait for the compilation to complete, we're going to press play. Okay, then we're going to click here, and once it hits the wall, and notice something, this is very interesting. Okay, so the balls are being added to, are going to hit the wall, but the explosions, they are coming always from the center. Okay, they're coming from an odd position. Okay, so let's actually see what's happening here. Okay, so let's add a comment here just to re-trigger the compilation. So we have a warning here. The variable explosion object is assigned, but its value is never used. Okay, so the problem here is we type explosion prefab. We've actually needed to type explosion object. Okay, so we need to do this because we're changing the position of the object that has just been instantiated. Okay, so again, we're going to save this, go back to Unity, and this is the time that we have the entire scene set up. Okay, we have the wall, we have the floor, we have set all of the effects that we wanted. We can even save the scene now by going to File, hit Save Scene, and then we name this as simulation.unity, for example. Let's try this one more time. We hit play, and now every time the spheres they hit the wall, we see all of these little cubelets coming out of it. Okay, and well, it's up to you to tune this to what you want. Maybe you want to add more particles with different colors. Maybe you want the force that is added in here is smaller. So for example, you can choose all of these prefabs and change the explosion force to 100, for example. You can just modify it there, save the scene, then play again and keep shooting bullets. Okay, so it's going to look like this. Alright, so, well, this is basically it for this lesson. We've learned how to deal with prefabs by making this very simple simulation here. When we hit a wall, we keep seeing these effects here. And you're going to see that you learn how to modify a prefab instance and save all the modifications in the actual prefab, for example. You see that normal game objects can instantiate prefabs, and prefabs can instantiate other prefabs, for example. In general, it's just something that can be reused. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this lesson. This is going to be very useful when you're developing more games. It's going to be essential when making some hit games. And my